www.drhodgewindoverinstitute.com. Disclaimer. The information presented in this lecture novel, Decoding Anxiety Part 4, How to Teach the Amygdala, is intended for educational and informational purposes only. It is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician, mental health professional, or other qualified health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or psychological condition. The author, publisher, and distributors of this work are not responsible for any specific health or wellness needs that may require professional supervision. They are not liable for any damages or negative consequences arising from the use or application of the information contained in this book. The exposure techniques described in this book are evidence-based interventions drawn from established therapeutic practices. However, exposure work can be emotionally challenging and may temporarily increase anxiety symptoms. It is strongly recommended that readers undertake exposure exercises under the guidance of a licensed mental health professional, particularly when working with traumatic memories or severe anxiety disorders. The stories, examples, and case illustrations in this book are fictional composites created for educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, is entirely coincidental. The references provided at the end of this book are included for further reading and research. The inclusion of these references does not imply endorsement of this book by the authors of those works. If you are experiencing a mental health emergency, please contact emergency services immediately or go to your nearest emergency room. Crisis hotlines are available 24 hours a day and can provide immediate support. National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, 988 or 1-800-273-8255 crisis text line. Text HOME to 741741. This book is a lecture novel, a literary format designed to present educational content through narrative. It is not a replacement for therapy, a self-administered treatment program, or a substitute for professional clinical judgment. The wave always falls, but you do not have to ride it alone. Seek support. Ask for help. You are worth it. Introduction. What this book will teach you. You are sitting in a lecture hall that exists only in these pages. The seats are worn, the air smells of old paper, and on the wall behind the stage, someone has painted words that have been there for decades. The wave always falls. You do not know who painted them. You do not know when, but you will come to understand what they mean. The teacher is Dr. Stella. She has no office hours, no email address, no published papers. She exists only in these lectures, speaking directly to students who have found their way to her because they cannot sleep at night, because their hearts race in the dining hall, because they have forgotten what it feels like to breathe without a weight on their chest. This book is about the amygdala, that small, almond-shaped region buried deep in your brain that has been running your life without your permission. You will learn how it works, how it learns, and why it keeps sounding alarms long after the danger has passed. You will learn that your amygdala is not your enemy. It is your overprotective, misinformed, desperately loyal bodyguard. And like any bodyguard who has learned the wrong lessons, it can be retrained. You will learn about triggers. The sounds, objects, smells, sensations, situations, and memories that set off your amygdala's alarms. You will learn to map your fears, to identify the bells that signal danger to a brain that cannot tell the difference between a dining hall and a cliff edge. You will learn about exposure, the process of facing your fears in a structured, intentional way so that your amygdala can learn new associations. You will discover that the only way to rewire the circuitry of fear is to activate it, to feel the anxiety, to ride the wave until it falls. You will learn about in vivo exposure, facing real triggers in the real world. About imaginal exposure, facing fears in the safety of your own mind. About interoceptive exposure, facing the very sensations your body creates when you are afraid. You will learn to use the subjective units of distress scale, a simple tool for measuring your anxiety that will become your compass through the work ahead. You will learn the half rule, the guideline that tells you when you have stayed long enough for your amygdala to learn. You will learn to build hierarchies, to construct ladders from your smallest fears to your largest, and to climb them one rung at a time. The lectures are waiting. Dr. Stella is about to begin. Take a breath. Find a comfortable seat. And listen. Dedication. Table of contents. Chapter 1. The bodyguard in your brain. Understanding the amygdala. The amygdala is a small, almond-shaped structure located deep within the temporal lobes of your brain. It is about the size and shape of an almond, and you have two of them, one on each side. Despite its small size, the amygdala plays an enormous role in your emotional life, particularly in the experience of fear and anxiety. Think of your amygdala as your very own dedicated, overprotective bodyguard. Its only job is to keep you safe. It has been on duty since the day you were born, scanning every face, every shadow, every situation for signs of danger. It does not sleep. It does not take breaks. It has no sense of humor and no ability to distinguish between a real threat and a false alarm. The amygdala is where emotional learning occurs. When you have an experience that is painful, frightening, or distressing, your amygdala takes note. It creates associations between neutral elements of that experience and the negative outcome. Situations that were originally neutral or safe come to elicit fear and anxiety. They become triggers. This learning occurs according to the language of the amygdala, which is through associations or pairings. When a trigger is paired with a negative event, something that automatically causes pain, discomfort, or other negative responses, the trigger comes to elicit fear or anxiety on its own. Consider this example. Imagine you are walking across campus and a large dog runs toward you barking aggressively. You are terrified. Your heart races, you freeze, you feel a surge of adrenaline. Nothing bad actually happens, the dog stops, but the experience is frightening. Your amygdala takes note. It creates a circuit, large dog plus running toward me equals danger. The next time you see a large dog, even a friendly one on a leash, your amygdala may sound the alarm. Your heart races, your palms sweat, you feel the urge to flee. The dog has become a trigger. This is how anxiety is built. A neutral situation, a party, a classroom, a first date, gets paired with a negative event. Maybe you bombed a presentation. Maybe you were publicly humiliated. Maybe you felt a sudden overwhelming panic attack for no reason you could understand. Your amygdala, the ever-vigilant bodyguard, took note. It created a circuit. Now just walking into a classroom, just seeing a crowd, just thinking about a date is the trigger. And your body reacts as if the lightning bolt is coming. Your amygdala is not always accurate. It is a first responder, not a detective. It responds in error often. It cries wolf based on old, outdated information. And its mistake feels absolutely real. The good news is that the circuitry in the amygdala can be rewired through new experiences. Exposure interventions allow us to rewire the circuitry, producing lasting change. Some clients become more engaged in exposure when it is framed as teaching the amygdala. Remember, the amygdala is not always accurate, responds in error, and needs to be corrected, not trusted. We cannot communicate with the amygdala through language, reason, or logic. You cannot sit your bodyguard down and explain that public speaking is not actually going to kill you, that the statistical probability is extremely low. Your bodyguard does not understand words. The amygdala needs experience to learn. It learns on the basis of associations or pairings. Presenting the triggers that elicit anxiety and having no negative consequences occur, other than the anxiety itself, teaches the amygdala new responses to the trigger. The amygdala does not communicate in words, but through the bodily sensations it creates. In a similar way, we communicate to the amygdala not through words, but by providing it new experiences to process. New connections in the amygdala are only made when the circuitry is activated, and this also means anxiety is being experienced. We need to activate the amygdala to generate new connections. When we are experiencing anxiety, we are in the best position to teach the amygdala something new. Just like you need to get the water hot to make tea, you need to heat up the circuitry to make changes in it. Chapter 2. The Art of Surfing the Storm. Withstanding Anxiety to Create Change. Training clients with exposure strategies can change the client's relationship with anxiety. When you feel anxiety, you know you have the amygdala's attention and can teach it something. The circuitry is being placed in an activated state so that changes in circuitry can be made. Instead of avoiding anxiety eliciting triggers, clients learn to withstand anxiety to achieve permanent change. They push through anxiety to change the amygdala. They feel empowered to respond to the trigger differently. Avoidance robs the amygdala of opportunities to learn. When an individual avoids a trigger that elicits anxiety, it prevents the amygdala from having a new experience with that situation or object. Avoidance preserves the current wiring and the anxious responding. New experiences with the situation or object are needed in order to provide the amygdala with learning experiences. Withstanding anxiety promotes learning. The amygdala needs experience to learn. Imagine a student named Alex who feels intense anxiety every time he walks into the dining hall. His heart races, his palms sweat. He feels like everyone is staring at him. His natural response is to grab his food and rush back to his dorm room to eat alone. Every time he does this, he feels immediate relief. But what has he taught his amygdala? He has taught it that the dining hall is dangerous and that fleeing was the right choice. The next time he approaches the dining hall, the anxiety will be just as strong, if not stronger. Now imagine that Alex decides to try a different approach. He walks into the dining hall, gets his food, and sits down at a table. His heart is racing. He wants to leave. But he stays. He sits there for 10 minutes, then 20, then 30. He notices that after about 15 minutes, his anxiety starts to decrease. It does not go away completely, but it becomes more manageable. He stays for a full 45 minutes and then leaves, not because he fled, but because he finished his meal. What has Alex taught his amygdala? He has taught it that the dining hall plus staying equals no disaster. He has provided a new experience, a new pairing. The next time he approaches the dining hall, his anxiety may still be there, but it will likely be slightly less. With enough repetitions, the anxiety will continue to decrease. The amygdala will learn that the dining hall is safe. This is the wave of anxiety. It rises, it peaks, and if you do not feed it by running away, it will naturally fall. Your body cannot sustain that level of arousal forever. It exhausts itself. And when it falls while you are still in the situation, still facing the trigger, your amygdala takes notes. It learns that the trigger is not a death sentence. It learns that the feeling passes. Avoidance feels good in the moment. It provides instant relief. But it is a thief. It robs your amygdala of the chance to learn the truth. It preserves the faulty wiring. It keeps the circuit exactly as it is. Trigger equals danger. Flee immediately. When you avoid, you never get to the part where the wave falls naturally. You never learn that you can survive the feeling. You never teach your amygdala anything new. You just reinforce the old, broken lesson. Every time you avoid, you are telling your amygdala, good job, bodyguard. You were right. That thing was terrifying. Thank you for saving me. And your amygdala, being the diligent protector it is, says, you are welcome. I will be even more alert next time. The trigger grows stronger. The anxiety grows louder. The world grows smaller. Avoidance feels like the solution, but it is actually the problem. It is the lock, not the key. And every time you avoid, you are turning the lock tighter. When you stop trying to make the anxiety go away, when you stop fighting it, something miraculous happens. You take away its power. The anxiety is still there, but it is no longer the enemy. It is just information. It is just your amygdala doing its job, even if it is doing it badly. This is what it means to change your relationship with anxiety. Instead of seeing it as a signal to flee, you begin to see it as a signal to teach. When you feel that rush, that heat, that pounding heart, you do not think, oh no, here it comes, I have to get out. You think, oh good, my amygdala is activated. Now I can teach it something new. You flip the script. Anxiety is no longer the enemy. It is the indicator that you are exactly where you need to be. It is the green light for learning. The discomfort is the price of admission to a rewired brain. Chapter 3. The toolbox before the storm. Preparation for exposure work. Exposure treatment typically takes at least 15 sessions, but it is best approached in a way that responds to the individual needs of a specific client. Preparation is necessary before exposure sessions. The client needs to understand the nature of anxiety in the brain and body and the purpose of exposure. The client needs to be stabilized in terms of sleep and exercise approaches for best response. The number of exposure sessions varies depending on the nature of the client's fears and how the client responds to exposure. There are a number of workbooks and treatment protocols that you can purchase to help structure treatment. Before exposure begins, 3 key areas must be addressed. First, psychoeducation. Make sure the client understands the amygdala and cortex contributions to anxiety, the physiology of the fight or flight response, and the normality of the anxiety response. Second, breathing training. Make sure the client knows diaphragmatic breathing techniques to assist in coping with anxiety and preventing hyperventilation. Third, cognitive restructuring. Make sure the client understands the detrimental effects of anxiety increasing thoughts and how to test, challenge, and replace them with coping thoughts. Let us examine each of these in detail. Psychoeducation means you must understand what is happening inside you. Not in a vague, I am anxious kind of way, but in a detailed, scientific, this is my amygdala and this is my cortex and this is why my hands are shaking kind of way. Consider the experience of a panic attack. Your heart races, you cannot breathe, you feel dizzy, you are convinced you are dying. This is the fight or flight response. Your amygdala just hit the nuclear button. It flooded your body with adrenaline and cortisol. It shut down your digestive system, dilated your pupils, increased your heart rate, and prepared your muscles to run or fight. All of that is normal. All of that is your body doing exactly what it is designed to do. The problem is, your amygdala triggered that response to a pop quiz, or a text from your ex, or a crowded elevator, not a saber-toothed tiger. The response is normal. The trigger is the error. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are not weak. You are just operating on faulty information. Your bodyguard is mistaken. And now that you know that, you can start to correct it. Psychoeducation means you learn the difference between danger and discomfort, between a real threat and a false alarm, between dying and just feeling like you are dying. They are not the same thing, and your amygdala cannot tell the difference without your help. Breathing training is the second tool. You have been breathing your whole life. But have you been breathing well? Have you been breathing in a way that communicates safety to your nervous system? Or have you been breathing in the shallow, rapid, chest-heaving way that tells your amygdala, yes, yes, we are definitely being chased by something. Keep the panic coming? Panic breathing is shallow and rapid. It leads to hyperventilation, which makes you dizzy, makes your fingers tingle, makes the panic worse. It is like throwing gasoline on a fire. Diaphragmatic breathing, or belly breathing, is different. You inhale slowly through your nose, and your stomach rises while your chest remains relatively still. You exhale even more slowly through pursed lips. This is the breathing that tells your nervous system, we are safe. We are not running. We are not fighting. We are here and we are okay. This is not about making the anxiety disappear. This is about giving yourself an anchor. When the wave hits, when the panic rises, you have something to come back to. You have a way to prevent the spiral from becoming a free fall. The breathing is not about escaping the feeling. It is about staying in the game long enough to learn from it. It is about keeping your cortex online, keeping your reasoning brain from shutting down completely, so you can watch the wave and see it fall. Cognitive restructuring is the third tool. This means changing the way you talk to yourself. Your thoughts are not just thoughts. They are instructions to your amygdala. Consider this thought. I am going to fail this test and flunk out of school and ruin my life. What does that thought do to your body? Does it calm you down? Does it relax your shoulders? Does it tell your amygdala everything is fine, no need to panic? No. It makes everything worse. Your heart starts racing. You cannot focus. You just want to run away. That thought is not just a thought. It is a command. It is a signal to your amygdala that says, danger, catastrophe, do something. And your amygdala, being the loyal bodyguard it is, responds with a full-scale alert. Now consider this thought. I am nervous about this test. That is normal. I have been nervous before and done fine. I will study what I can and do my best. This thought is a very different command. This thought says to your amygdala, I see you. I hear you. But we have been here before and we survived. We can handle this. Cognitive restructuring is the practice of catching the catastrophic thoughts, testing them against reality, and replacing them with thoughts that are more accurate and more helpful. It is not toxic positivity. It is not pretending everything is fine when it is not. It is looking at the evidence and choosing a thought that serves you instead of one that destroys you. Chapter 4. The stories we tell ourselves. Cognitive contributions to anxiety. Your amygdala is the bodyguard. But your thoughts are the informants. They're the ones whispering in the bodyguard's ear, telling it what is dangerous and what is safe. And sometimes, maybe most of the time, your informants are lying to you. Your thoughts can be biased, distorted, catastrophically wrong. And when they are, they feed your amygdala a steady diet of fear. The bodyguard hears these thoughts and thinks, oh, the informant says there is danger everywhere. I better stay on high alert. And the cycle continues. Consider this common scenario. It is the night before a big exam. You have studied, but not as much as you wanted. You are tired. You are alone in your dorm room. And a thought appears. I am going to fail. Then another thought follows. If I fail this test, I will fail the class. Then another. If I fail the class, I will lose my scholarship. Then another. I will have to drop out of school. Then another. I will disappoint my family and never get a good job and ruin my entire life. In just a few steps, you have constructed an entire ruined life from a single night of inadequate studying. This is a cognitive distortion called catastrophizing. You take a small, manageable possibility, a less than perfect test score, and you spiral all the way to complete disaster. Your informant just told your amygdala that a test is a life or death situation. What do you think the amygdala does with that information? It panics. It floods your body with adrenaline. It makes it impossible to focus, impossible to sleep, impossible to think clearly. And then, because you cannot focus or sleep or think, you actually do worse on the test. The thought becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Your informant created the very disaster it predicted. This is why cognitive restructuring is not just positive thinking fluff. It is an essential survival skill. It is how you stop the spiral before it starts. It is how you become a reliable informant instead of a panicked liar. How do you do it? You catch the thought. You check it against the evidence. You change it to something more accurate and more helpful. Take the thought, I am going to fail. What is the evidence for that thought? You did not study enough. You feel unprepared. What is the evidence against that thought? You have passed tests before when you felt unprepared. You know most of the material. You have never actually failed a test in this class. Failing means getting below a certain score, and you do not even know what that score is. What is the most likely outcome? Probably that you will do okay. Not great, but okay. Maybe get a B instead of an A. And if you get a B instead of an A, does that lead to flunking out and ruining your life? No, definitely not. The catastrophic thought was not just unhelpful. It was inaccurate. It was a lie your informant told your amygdala. And now you have the evidence to prove it. Catch it. Check it. Change it. This is the 3-step process of cognitive restructuring. Catch the catastrophic thought. Check it against the evidence. Change it to something more accurate and more helpful. Notice you are not changing it to I am going to get an A and everything will be perfect. That is just another distortion. You are changing it to something you can actually believe. Something grounded in reality. Something that does not send your amygdala into a panic. Coping statements can be helpful during this process. Here are some examples. My anxiety may not feel good, but it is not dangerous or harmful. Anxiety feels terrible. It feels like dying, but it is not dying. It is just a feeling. Your body is designed to survive it. You have survived it before. You will survive it again. If I stay in the situation, my anxiety will go down. This is the promise of the wave. It always falls. Always. Your job is just to be there when it happens. My anxiety does not keep me from managing this situation. Anxiety wants you to believe you are incapable. that you need to flee to survive. But you can feel anxious and still function. You can feel terrified and still raise your hand. You can feel your heart pounding and still take the test. The anxiety is not in charge. You are. I have to activate my amygdala to make changes in my anxiety. This is the reframe. The heat is not the enemy. The heat is the classroom. When you feel anxious, you are not failing. You are learning. I do not like feeling anxiety, but it always goes away eventually. It always goes away. It has to. Your body cannot sustain that level of arousal forever. The wave always falls. This is uncomfortable, but I can handle it. Uncomfortable is not the same as unbearable. You can handle uncomfortable. You have been handling uncomfortable your whole life. This is just one more thing. I am teaching my amygdala that there is nothing to fear. This is the whole point. Every time you stay, every time you ride the wave, every time you face the trigger and survive, you are teaching. You are the professor now. Your amygdala is the student. And the lesson is safety. Chapter 5. The 2 roads to freedom. Cortex and amygdala-based anxiety. Cognitive restructuring approaches help clients learn not to allow anxiety-igniting thoughts in their cortex to activate the amygdala. Even if clients learn to keep the cortex from activating the amygdala, this does not mean that they can prevent panic attacks and anxiety from being created by the amygdala itself. If the amygdala has learned to respond to certain triggers, the only way to change the amygdala's responding is by teaching new responses through the exposure process. To manage anxiety, clients need to consider both cortex-focused and amygdala-focused interventions. Think of it this way. Your cortex is the CEO of your brain. It is rational, logical, good with language and planning. It is the part of you that reads textbooks, has conversations, and makes coping statements. Your amygdala is the head of security. It does not report to the CEO. It reports directly to the body. It has its own sources of information, its own memories, its own learned responses. The CEO can send memos. The CEO can say, everything is fine. The building is safe. No need to panic. And the head of security can read those memos and say, that is nice, while simultaneously triggering the alarm because it remembers that one time something bad happened in this exact situation. This is why some people can know intellectually that flying is safe, that public speaking will not kill them, that the elevator is not a death trap, and still feel their hearts race, their palms sweat, their breath shorten the moment they step on the plane, the stage, the elevator. The cortex knows. The amygdala remembers. And the amygdala is faster. The amygdala does not process language. It does not process logic. It processes experience. It processes association. It processes pairing. And once it has learned that a trigger means danger, it will respond to that trigger with fear every single time until it learns something new through experience. Coping statements help you keep the cortex from adding fuel to the fire. They help you avoid the spiral where your thoughts make the anxiety worse. They help you stay present and grounded. But they do not, by themselves, rewire the amygdala. They cannot. The amygdala does not understand words. It only understands experiences. Both the cortex and the amygdala can create anxiety. The cortex creates anxiety through thoughts, catastrophic predictions, negative self-talk, rumination on past failures. That kind of anxiety responds well to cognitive restructuring. You change the thought, you reduce the anxiety. The amygdala creates anxiety through learned associations, the bell, and the lightning bolt. That kind of anxiety does not respond to thoughts. It only responds to new experiences, new pairings, new learning. To manage anxiety fully, to truly free yourself, you need both. You need to quiet the cortex with cognitive restructuring, and you need to rewire the amygdala with exposure. One without the other is incomplete. Has anyone ever had a panic attack seemingly out of nowhere? No trigger you could identify. No catastrophic thought beforehand. Suddenly, your heart is racing, you cannot breathe, you are convinced you are dying, and you have no idea why. That is your amygdala firing without cortex input. That is the head of security triggering the alarm based on something it sensed, something it remembered, something it associated with danger, even though your conscious mind has no idea what happened. That is amygdala-based anxiety. This is why exposure is non-negotiable. This is why you cannot think your way out of every panic attack. This is why the wave must be ridden, not just reasoned with. Your amygdala holds memories your cortex cannot access. It holds fears your thoughts cannot soothe. It holds learning that only new experience can overwrite. When the trigger is unknown, when the panic seems to come from nowhere, your job is different. Your job is not to fight it or figure it out. Your job is to ride it, to let it happen, to let the wave peak and fall without adding fear of the fear itself. This is where statements like my anxiety may not feel good, but it is not dangerous or harmful become essential. This is where I do not like feeling anxiety, but it always goes away, eventually becomes your lifeline. You do not need to know why the amygdala fired. You just need to survive it without making it worse. And every time you survive a panic attack without fleeing, without adding catastrophic thoughts, you teach your amygdala something valuable. You teach it that panic attacks are survivable. You teach it that the alarm can sound and you can still be okay. Chapter 6. The map of your fears. Identifying triggers. Every trigger tells a story. Every trigger is evidence of a past pairing, a moment when something neutral became associated with something painful. Your amygdala has been keeping a record, and every trigger is an entry in that record. Learning to read those entries is essential to the work of exposure. Triggers come in many forms. They can be external things in the world around you, or internal things happening inside your own body and mind. Sound triggers. A noise that your amygdala has learned to associate with danger. For a veteran, it might be the sound of explosions, helicopters, or gunfire. A car backfiring on campus, and suddenly they are back in combat, heart racing, body flooded with adrenaline, even though they are safe in a parking lot. But sound triggers are not only for veterans. A student who is in a car accident might panic at the sound of screeching tires. Someone who had a panic attack in a crowded room might feel their chest tighten when they hear loud chatter. A child who is startled by a barking dog might grow into an adult who flinches at every unexpected noise. Object triggers. A thing that has become associated with fear. A child becomes afraid of a stuffed animal that fell off a shelf and startled her. A student feels their stomach drop every time they see a particular textbook because it reminds them of a class they failed. A person avoids dogs after being bitten years ago. Objects are neutral. They are just things. But your amygdala does not see things. It sees history. It sees the pairing. The stuffed animal plus the fall equals danger. The textbook plus failure equals threat. The dog plus the bite equals run. Smell triggers are among the most powerful because the olfactory system has a direct line to the amygdala. Smell bypasses the cortex almost entirely. It goes straight to the emotional brain. A person smells tomato sauce and feels nauseous, not because there is anything wrong with tomato sauce, but because the last time they smelled it, they had food poisoning. A student walks past someone wearing a particular cologne and suddenly feels sad or scared because that scent belonged to someone who hurt them. A scent from childhood, long forgotten, washes over you in a crowd and suddenly you are 7 years old again, terrified and not knowing why. Sensation triggers are especially tricky because they come from inside your own body. A client feels dizzy and panics, not because dizziness is dangerous, but because the last time they felt dizzy, they had a panic attack. Now dizziness itself becomes the trigger. Your own body sensations, heart racing, shortness of breath, butterflies in your stomach, become the bells that set off your amygdala. You feel your heart pound, and you think, oh no, here it comes, and then here it comes, because the fear of the sensation creates more of the sensation. This is a vicious cycle. Sensation triggers fear, which creates more sensation, which triggers more fear. Situation triggers. When sitting in a circle of people, a woman feels fearful. Not because the people are threatening, but because her amygdala has learned that this arrangement means something. Maybe she was humiliated in a circle in elementary school. Maybe she had a panic attack in a meeting. Maybe she was once trapped and could not escape. Situations are complex. They contain many elements. But your amygdala does not parse complexity. It sees the circle and sounds the alarm. It sees a classroom and prepares for humiliation. It sees a party and expects rejection. It sees an elevator and predicts suffocation. Memory triggers. When recalling an event, the person becomes afraid. Not because the event is happening now, but because the memory of it activates the same neural circuits that were active during the event itself. Your amygdala cannot reliably distinguish between remembering a trauma and experiencing it. This is why flashbacks are so devastating. This is why someone can be perfectly safe in their dorm room and suddenly feel like they are back in the moment they were hurt. The memory is the trigger. The past becomes the present. And the amygdala responds accordingly. Your triggers are not your enemies. They're your teachers. Each one is a clue to what your amygdala has learned, what pairings it has stored, what experiences it is using to keep you safe. When you know your triggers, you know where to focus your work. You know which situations to approach with curiosity instead of fear. You know which sensations to ride instead of fight. Chapter 7. The arena of real life. In vivo exposure. In vivo means live exposure. The client is presented with objects, cues, or situations that provoke anxiety, the triggers that are typically avoided. Repeated exposure increases the client's ability to tolerate anxiety-provoking situations and stimuli, and ultimately reduces anxiety associated with these situations and stimuli. It is essential that the client experience anxiety for exposure to be successful. The circuits must be activated. Exposure is one of the most powerful therapeutic tools in the cognitive behavioral therapy toolkit. Some therapists may avoid it because it involves creating anxiety. In vivo exposure means you present yourself with the actual objects, cues, or situations that provoke your anxiety. The things you typically avoid. The things your amygdala has learned to fear. And you do it on purpose, with intention, with preparation, and with the goal of teaching your amygdala something new. A client who fears elevators stands in front of an elevator. A student who fears public speaking raises their hand in class. A person who fears crowds walks into the dining hall during the lunch rush. Live. Real. In vivo. And here is the most important thing. For exposure to work, you must experience anxiety. You must feel the heat. You must activate the circuit. If you are not anxious, if you are completely comfortable, your amygdala is not paying attention. The water is not hot. No tea is being made. You have to feel the anxiety. You have to let the wave rise. But here is what makes it bearable. You also know that the wave will fall. You know that the feeling is temporary. You know that on the other side of this discomfort is freedom. And every time you do it, every time you stay, the wave gets a little smaller, a little shorter, a little less powerful. You are not seeking suffering. You are seeking learning. The anxiety is not the goal. It is the doorway. You walk through it to get to the other side. In vivo exposure works when nothing else does. It works for panic, for phobias, for social anxiety, for PTSD, for obsessive compulsive disorder. It works because it speaks the language of the amygdala. Here is how it works. You identify a trigger. You create a ladder, starting with the smallest version. You approach that trigger. You stay in the situation until your anxiety goes down, or at least until you have given your amygdala a new experience of surviving. Then you do it again, and again, and again. Repeated exposure. Not once, not twice. Repeated. Your amygdala learns through repetition. The first time you face a trigger, the anxiety may be intense. The second time, slightly less. The 10th time, significantly less. The 100th time, the trigger may barely register. The circuit has been rewired. How many times does it take? That depends on you, on your history, on the strength of the original learning, on how consistently you practice. Some fears fade quickly. Others take time. The key is not the number, but the direction. Are you moving toward the fear or away from it? Are you feeding the circuit or starving it? Every time you avoid, you strengthen the fear. Every time you face it, you weaken it. This is the law of the amygdala. It never lies. It never cheats. It simply responds to your behavior. What do you do when the trigger appears? That is the only question that matters. Chapter 8. The movie screen in your mind. Imaginal exposure. In imaginal exposure, the client is imagining or thinking about the triggers and anxiety eliciting situations rather than experiencing them live. There are 3 purposes for imaginal exposure. The first purpose is when you cannot create the situation or when the therapist cannot visit it. The client is asked to create detailed images of what they are concerned about, including actions and consequences. Sharing these images with the therapist may be difficult, and the therapist may need to guess at some elements and show comfort with discussing them. The second purpose is that imaginal exposure also prepares for in vivo work. The client may need a more gradual introduction to exposure, or the therapist may need more information about triggers. The third purpose is that imaginal exposure may allow a client to process and habituate to a traumatic memory. In this case, the client is asked to recount a traumatic experience that continues to be a source of problems. The experience is discussed in part or in its entirety in as much detail as the client can use, with a focus not only on what occurred, but on feelings and thoughts the client had in reaction to the experience. The client's reaction to the experience will change after repeated exposures to telling it. The therapist may record the client's description of the scene and consequences and have the client listen to it repeatedly each day. When we do imaginal exposure, detail is everything. Your amygdala needs a rich, vivid experience to learn from. A vague image will not activate the circuit enough to create change. You must build the scene in your mind with precision, with sensory detail, with the feelings and thoughts that arise. You are not just imagining the trigger. You are imagining yourself in the situation. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? What sensations arise in your body? What thoughts run through your mind? What are you afraid will happen next? Build it all into the image. In the moment, the image will be intense. That is the point. You need enough heat to teach the amygdala. But here is what you must remember. You are in control. You are creating the image. You can pause it, slow it down, step back from it. You are the director of this movie, not just the actor. The detail is what makes the exposure real enough to matter. A blurry image teaches nothing. A vivid image teaches everything. Sharing these images with another person can be extremely difficult. When you describe your fears out loud, when you put words to the images that haunt you, you become vulnerable in a new way. You may feel shame. You may feel exposed. You may want to stop. This is normal. This is expected. And this is part of the work. When you share your imaginal exposure with someone you trust, you are teaching your amygdala that the images themselves are not dangerous. You are learning that speaking your fears does not make them real. You are building new associations with the very act of telling. For traumatic memories, imaginal exposure is perhaps the most important and the most difficult. Experiences from the past that continue to cause problems in the present. Memories that activate the fear circuit every time they arise, keeping you trapped in a moment that is long over. When a client has a traumatic memory, the goal is not to erase it. The goal is to change the client's reaction to it. To take a memory that feels like it is happening now and turn it into what it actually is. Something that happened then. Something that is over. Something that you survived. The client is asked to recount the traumatic experience, in part or in its entirety, in as much detail as they can manage. Not only what occurred, but what they felt, what they thought, what sensations arose in their body. The client tells the story while staying present, while breathing, while anchored in the safety of the room. And then they tell it again, and again, and again. Each time, the memory loses some of its power. Each time, the amygdala learns that telling the story is not the same as living through it again. Each time, the fear response diminishes. This is called habituation. The memory remains, but the terror fades. Chapter 9. The Great Shift. Changing your approach to anxiety. Anxiety is an aversive experience that motivates avoidance. The natural and automatic response to anxiety is to back away from situations and objects that elicit anxiety and to attempt to minimize the experience of anxiety. Exposure training works to change that approach to anxiety. When clients are trained in exposure exercises, they are learning to approach anxiety differently. They are being trained to see the anxiety response in a new way, as not accurate, as not dangerous, and to persist in the presence of the experience of anxiety. They learn to push through anxiety in order to change it. Let us be honest with ourselves. Anxiety feels terrible. It feels like dying. It feels like something is terribly wrong and you must make it stop. The natural, automatic, instinctive response to that feeling is to back away, to flee, to escape, to do whatever it takes to make the feeling go away. This is not a character flaw. This is not weakness. This is how you are wired. Your nervous system is designed to avoid pain, and anxiety is pain. Your amygdala is designed to protect you, and it believes that fleeing the trigger is protection. The response is automatic. It is natural. It is human. But natural is not always helpful. Automatic is not always accurate. The response that kept your ancestors alive on the savannah is the same response that now keeps you trapped in a dorm room, avoiding the dining hall, avoiding conversations, avoiding your own life. Your amygdala does not know that the dining hall is safe. It does not know that the classroom is not a threat. It only knows that anxiety is aversive and avoidance is relief. And so it drives you to avoid, again and again, strengthening the very circuits that imprison you. The work of exposure is to override that automatic response, to replace it with something new, to train you to do the opposite of what your instincts demand, to approach instead of avoid, to stay instead of flee, to push through instead of back away. When you complete exposure work, you no longer see anxiety as a signal to run. You see it as a signal to teach. You no longer experience fear as a command to escape. You experience it as an opportunity to learn. You no longer feel the heat and think, oh no, here it comes. You feel the heat and think, good, my amygdala is activated. Now I can do the work. In the beginning, you do not want to feel anxious. You tolerate it. You endure it. You survive it. But over time, with repeated exposure, with repeated success, with repeated evidence that you can handle it, something shifts. You begin to trust yourself. You begin to know, deep in your bones, that you can survive the wave. You begin to see anxiety not as a monster, but as a sensation, uncomfortable but temporary, unpleasant but survivable. And in that shift, the fear of fear itself begins to dissolve. The goal is not to eliminate anxiety from your life. That is impossible. Anxiety is a normal human emotion. Everyone feels it. The goal is to stop the secondary fear, the fear of the fear, the panic about the panic, the spiral that turns a moment of discomfort into an hour of terror. When you stop being afraid of your own anxiety, everything changes. The wave still comes, but you no longer drown. The heat still rises, but you no longer burn. The trigger still appears, but you no longer flee. You simply stand there, feeling what you feel, knowing that it will pass, knowing that you are safe even when your body screams otherwise. Chapter 10. The Science of Rewiring. What happens inside your brain? Research indicates that exposure experiences result in changes in the amygdala. New memories are formed in a particular part of the amygdala called the lateral nucleus, and this process depends on neurons firing in this area. These new memories inhibit or weaken the original fear memory encoded in the lateral nucleus. The new memories seem to be encoded in the prefrontal cortex as well as the amygdala and reflect a connection between these areas. Interaction between the amygdala and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex seems to be necessary for new memories to be formed which reduce fear responding. Clients are not simply learning to tolerate anxiety. They would not be put through the experience if it did not lead to lasting change. They are being shown how to change the amygdala. They need to activate the amygdala and experience anxiety in order to change how the amygdala responds. Think of the GPS in your vehicle. When you change the route, at first the GPS asks you to turn around, but eventually it recalibrates and makes a new route. Similarly, clients are being trained to see how to communicate new information to the amygdala. It only learns through experience, so they have to show it that the object or situation is safe. This knowledge and experience can be very empowering. Inside your amygdala, there is a region called the lateral nucleus. This is where fear memories are encoded. When you had the original pairing, the bell and the lightning bolt, that memory was stored here. It has been sitting in this tiny part of your brain ever since, waiting to be activated by the trigger. Research shows that when you do exposure, when you face your triggers and stay, new memories are formed in this same lateral nucleus, not somewhere else. Right there, in the same place where the fear memory lives. The new memory does not erase the old one. It creates a competing pathway. It tells your amygdala, yes, that thing was scary once. But now we have new information. Now we know it is safe. The old memory is still there, but the new memory is stronger. The new memory wins. Think of it like a path in the woods. The fear memory is a well-worn trail. Your feet have walked it many times. It is easy to follow. Exposure creates a new path parallel to the old one. At first, it is barely visible. You have to push through branches to walk it. But every time you take the new path, it becomes clearer. Eventually, the new path is the one your feet naturally follow. The old path grows over with weeds. But the amygdala does not work alone. Research shows that new memories which reduce fear responding are also encoded in the prefrontal cortex, specifically a region called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. This is the part of your brain that does high-level thinking, decision-making, and emotional regulation. When you do exposure work, you are building a connection between your amygdala and your prefrontal cortex. You are creating a communication pathway. Your prefrontal cortex learns to send messages to your amygdala saying, "It is okay. We are safe. You can calm down now." This connection, this interaction between the amygdala and the ventromedial prefrontal cortex is necessary for new memories to form that reduce fear responding. It is not enough to have new experiences. Your brain must integrate those experiences. It must connect the emotional memory with the rational understanding. This is why we do both. This is why we combine exposure with cognitive restructuring, with psychoeducation, with coping statements. The exposure provides the experience. The cognitive work helps integrate it. The coping statements give your prefrontal cortex language to use when communicating with your amygdala. Chapter 11. The final preparations. Before you climb the ladder. Before beginning exposure treatment, you need to make sure you have accomplished psychoeducation, breathing training, and cognitive restructuring. You also need to familiarize yourself with the different aspects of the experience of anxiety, recognize the role of cognitions, the meaning of physical symptoms and behaviors, and the relationship between these. You need to learn ways to communicate your anxiety levels quickly and accurately through ratings. The most common rating system is the Subjective Units of Distress Scale, or SUDS. The scale ranges from 0 to 100. 0 represents complete relaxation, almost asleep. 10 represents awake but very relaxed. 20 represents active but relaxed. 30 represents normal level of tension and focus. 40 represents mild tension or worry, somewhat unpleasant. 50 represents mild to moderate distress, unpleasant but few symptoms. 60 represents moderate distress, physical symptoms but able to think clearly. 70 represents moderate distress that interferes with concentration, physical distress. 80 represents high distress, feelings cannot be tolerated long, thinking impaired. 90 represents high to extreme distress, thinking substantially impaired. 100 represents extreme distress, panic, extreme bodily tension, the maximum fear you can imagine. Some factors that can impact the effectiveness of exposure treatment need to be addressed. Safety signals that clients are using need to be assessed and recognized before exposure. The medications that a client is taking may reduce the effectiveness of exposure and should be noted. The coping strategy of distraction, commonly used by individuals with anxiety, can be useful in some cases, but not in exposure. Safety signals are objects or behaviors that help a client feel more comfortable in an anxiety-provoking situation. Examples include a friend or family member, having medication available, holding a drink, chewing gum, gripping the steering wheel tightly, or sitting facing the door. Engaging in these behaviors or having these people or objects present can prevent the amygdala from learning. The amygdala is sensitive to the situation and will learn to reduce the fear response only when the safety signal is present. This is not effectively changing the amygdala's response. Prior to exposure, it is important to identify objects or behaviors that help a client feel more comfortable. If safety signals are not eliminated, they prevent exposure from being effective. If possible, eliminate safety signals from the beginning. For example, ask the client not to bring a medication bottle into the situation. They can be allowed in early exposure situations if necessary, but they always need to be eliminated in later exposures or anxiety will not be effectively reduced. For example, allow a client to grip the steering wheel tightly during initial exposures, but as anxiety is reduced, encourage the client to reduce the strength of grip so that they drive with a more relaxed hold on the wheel. Missing safety signals can impede progress in exposure. Chapter 12. The attention must stay on the fear. Why distraction is counterproductive. Distraction can sometimes be an effective intervention that reduces anxiety when cortex-based anxiety is the target. However, remember that exposure is designed to modify amygdala-based responding, so the goal is for clients to focus on the anxiety-eliciting cues, not distract themselves from these cues. The change that we are trying to create in the amygdala depends on activating the neural network storing memories about the cues, so it is essential that clients focus on the cues and activate these neural networks. If we activate these neural networks, the amygdala can make new emotional memories to replace the anxiety-producing ones. If the client looks away from the object, exposure is less effective. Clients need to be encouraged to focus on the cues, to see and hear and feel the object or situation. They should be discouraged from focusing elsewhere or distracting themselves from what they are experiencing. Tell clients that there is no way to change the amygdala's responding without activating the neural networks that are storing information about the cues. If you think of it as opening a file in a file cabinet or a file in a computer, we have to open up the file in order to change what is stored in it. Of course, as soon as we open the file, the amygdala reacts in fear, but this activation of the amygdala is necessary in order to change the reaction. At that moment, you have the amygdala's attention. When you feel that rush of anxiety, that spike of fear, that wave of discomfort, you are not in trouble. You are not failing. You are not broken. You are exactly where you need to be. You have the amygdala's attention. This is the moment you have been waiting for. This is the moment when change becomes possible. This is the moment when the file is open and ready to be edited. And if you can stay present, if you can keep your attention on the trigger, if you can ride the wave without distraction, you will teach your amygdala something it will never forget. The anxiety is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is right. It is a sign that the circuit is activated and ready to learn. It is a sign that you have the amygdala's attention and can now teach it something new. This reframe changes everything. Instead of thinking, oh no, here it comes, I need to make it stop, you can think, good. The file is open. Now I can do the work. Instead of panicking about the panic, you can welcome it as the opportunity it is. Chapter 13. The Art of Precise Attention. How to look at your fear. The way you direct your attention during exposure matters. Objective focus is more likely to reduce anxiety responses than subjective focus. Objective focus means clients describe what they are experiencing in a descriptive, objective manner. The focus is on sensations such as sights and sounds as well as feelings and thoughts. An example of objective focus is, I see the dog and it is moving quickly. I can see the teeth as its mouth is partly open. I hear it panting. I feel my heart beating and I start sweating. My eyes are focused on the teeth. I am thinking about it biting. My anxiety is at an 8. Subjective focus means clients speak from the perspective of their feelings. An example of subjective focus is, the dog looks dangerous. I cannot stand this. I feel terrible. I need to get away from this dog. Objective focus reduces anxiety more effectively because it activates the prefrontal cortex. When you describe your experience in neutral, observational language, you engage the thinking part of your brain. The ventromedial prefrontal cortex comes online. And the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala is exactly what we need to build. When you use subjective focus, you stay entirely in the amygdala. You feed the fear with more fear. You add judgment to sensation, which makes the sensation worse. The file is open, but instead of editing it, you are just reading the same terrible page over and over. Objective focus is like having a conversation with yourself while you are scared. A calm, curious, scientific conversation. You are the researcher and the research subject at the same time. You notice what is happening without getting swept away by it. You say to yourself, interesting. My heart is racing. My anxiety is at a 7. I am having the thought that something bad will happen. I wonder what will happen if I stay. This stance, this curious observer stance, is the sweet spot for exposure. You are fully present. You are fully engaged. But you are not drowning. You are surfing, not being pulled under. Chapter 13. Constructing hierarchies. Building your exposure ladder. Constructing more than one hierarchy is often necessary. Construct at least one for imaginal and one for in vivo desensitization, and sometimes others for different types of triggers, objects, and situations. Start by identifying feared situations in general that the client avoids or that elicit anxiety. Brainstorm with the client to identify triggers. Get a list of situations, objects, smells, and other cues that they avoid or that elicit anxiety and write them down. If a client has difficulty identifying cues, going through an imaginal exposure can be helpful because specific triggers are identified as the person discusses reactions. As the client comes up with different situations or triggers, spend some time exploring them and considering other likely triggers. For example, if a client is discussing difficulties making a purchase in a mall, you can explore how the client feels when approached by a salesperson or when trying on an item. Explain that you want the hierarchy to go from least to most fear eliciting to make exposure gradual. Ask the client to use the SUDS rating to help you put the different situations in order. This helps familiarize the client with using SUDS. Often it helps to start with the situation with highest fear and lowest fear and use SUDS to rate these and then focus on the rest. As you organize them, note if there is a significant gap between situations and see if the client can identify a situation to fill that gap. A well-built ladder takes a vast, overwhelming fear and breaks it into small, manageable pieces. It shows you the path to freedom step by step. It gives you a way to measure your progress and celebrate your victories. Without a ladder, exposure is just guessing. You do not know what to do next. You do not know if you are pushing too hard or not hard enough. You do not know if you are making progress. With a ladder, everything becomes clear. You have a map. You have a plan. You have a way forward. Chapter 14. Beginning exposure exercises. Taking the first steps. It is best to do initial exposure with a therapist present, whether in the office or in a natural setting, and then progress to clients doing them on their own. Starting with imaginal exposure is often best and allows the therapist to learn more about the client's way of processing anxiety-provoking situations. Interoceptive exposures, which focus on exposing clients to some of their symptoms of anxiety, may be advised if the client has a great deal of anxiety sensitivity or reactivity. When choosing items for exposure, it is best to start with one with a SUDS rating of 50 or 60 to allow for sufficient elicitation of anxiety and reduction potential. Discussing SUDS levels is an important part of the exposure process. Also, if you make a note of the SUDS levels that clients report, the numbers can be very useful in making illustrations for clients to see changes in their anxiety. Clients often benefit from seeing in graphic detail the changes that occur in their anxiety levels as they stay in the situation. You can do simple graphs of beginning, highest, and ending SUDS scores, and even combine them to show what happens as they do more exposure sessions. Comparing multiple graphs over time can also illustrate how changes are occurring. Chapter 16. Interoceptive exposure. Facing the sensations. Often a client has learned to respond with fear to certain sensations associated with fear and anxiety. Instead of the trigger being a situation or an object, the trigger is a physical sensation. This is very common in panic disorder or agoraphobia. Examples include trembling, increased heart rate, nausea, diarrhea, muscle tension or spasms, sensitivity to light, need to urinate, headache, dizziness, and derealization. Exposure can sometimes begin by deliberately eliciting some of these responses in order to reduce anxiety associated with them. Interoceptive exposure sessions might be the first exposures. At first, these exercises are done with the client present to demonstrate. To produce racing heart or shortness of breath, run in place for 2 minutes, lifting knees high. To produce dizziness, spin around for up to a minute, using a rotating chair if available. To produce a variety of symptoms including dizziness, unreality, and tingling, over-breathe while sitting for at least a minute. To produce feelings of shortness of breath, breathing through a straw works. To produce lightheadedness, put head between legs for 30 seconds, then quickly lift head. For fear of nausea and vomiting, the goal is not to have the client experience vomiting, but simply nausea. Websites such as emetophobiahelp.org present all kinds of images that are graded from less explicit to more explicit. Therapists have also been known to put soup in their mouths and spit it into a trash can to assist with exposure. It can be helpful to tell clients that if they do vomit, endorphins are released and there is a period of relaxation that occurs. Encourage the client to describe the experiences that they are having when experiencing the interoceptive symptoms. Rate how similar the symptoms are to the ones that they typically have. Rate their anxiety. Monitor their interpretations of the sensations and how their interpretations affect their anxiety level. It helps to have explained the reasons for the symptoms as related to the fight or flight response. Encourage them to consider whether their fears of what would happen occur when they have the symptoms. Wait until symptoms go away and then produce symptoms again 2 or 3 times, each time following the same steps. Chapter 15. Independent exposures and troubleshooting. Flying solo and fixing problems. After in-session exposures, the client should be instructed to do independent exposures, but the client needs to be carefully trained to focus on the trigger and on anxiety. The client needs to repeat the exposure, typically at least 3 times, before going on to a new exposure situation. The number of times can depend on the individual. It is good to give sheets on which to record information from each exposure, including initial anxiety, peak anxiety, and ending anxiety, as well as length of exposure. Clients often want to move ahead more quickly, but each step in the hierarchy must be repeated or the exposure may not be effective. Several problems can arise during exposure work and need to be addressed. If a client is reluctant to approach exposure, make sure the client understands how the amygdala learns from experience and ask for examples of overcoming any fears through exposure in their own lives. Use examples of making phone calls or other everyday activities that were once feared. If a client cannot identify triggers, consider visiting situations with the client in order to observe how they react to various cues, or work on imaginal exposure to distressing memories as triggers often become apparent. Regarding which hierarchy to start with, choose to work on triggers that are likely to make a difference in the client's life if anxiety related to that trigger decreases. If working on various memories in imaginal exposure, consider working on the earliest memory first. If a client reports little to no anxiety during exposure, several explanations are possible. Clients can overestimate their anxiety due to anticipatory anxiety and find that they do not respond much to the trigger once they attend to it. Clients can also dissociate and not be aware of their emotions, in which case they may need mindfulness training. If a client has flashbacks during exposure, they can be given assistance in recognizing the difference between the current situation and the past. Treatment focuses on being able to experience the present until the person is able to return to a focus on exposure. If anxiety does not go down during independent exposures where the therapist is not present, shift to in-session exposures so you can observe. The client may be stopping the session too soon due to distress. If this is occurring in session exposures, note whether the client is focusing on more than the triggers present. Is the client focusing on past memories or potential outcomes? In this case, cortex-based anxiety is keeping the amygdala activated. Keep track of SUDS ratings and show the client that reduction in fear might be modest, but is occurring. Chapter 16. When to terminate exposure. The half rule. Clients should remain in the presence of the trigger or in the anxiety-provoking situation until their fear decreases by half. Take the highest SUDS level and divide by 2. When anxiety reaches this level, the exposure can be stopped. Sometimes this takes 40 minutes, sometimes 70. It is difficult to predict with each client, so allow more than the traditional therapeutic hour. Experience seems to indicate it is typically less than 1 hour, but that cannot be foreseen, so it is best to plan ahead. Do not try to predict the length of time for the client, as this can lead the client to focus on time instead of anxiety reduction. This is the guideline. Take your highest SUDS level during the exposure and divide it by 2. When your anxiety reaches that number, you can stop. If your peak was 80, stay until you reach 40. If your peak was 60, stay until you reach 30. Half. Not gone. Not 0. Half. The half rule gives you a clear target. You are not guessing. You are not wondering if you have stayed long enough. You have a number. You watch the number drop. When it hits half of the peak, you are done. Your amygdala has learned. The time it takes is unpredictable. It depends on you, on the fear, on the day, on 1,000 factors you cannot control. This unpredictability is why you must give yourself grace. If an exposure takes longer than you expected, that is not failure. That is just how your amygdala is learning that day. If it goes faster than expected, celebrate. But do not compare one exposure to another. Each is its own journey. Chapter 17. Safety cautions. What to never do. Clients should never be exposed to situations that are not safe, as that defeats the purpose of exposure. Situations, objects, or individuals who genuinely pose a threat should not be a part of exposure. Some triggers which pose a potential threat, for example knives, can be necessary to include, but only when the client and situation has been carefully evaluated. Being creative in simulating things like blood, semen, or vomit can substitute similar substances. Another question is whether to have the client independently obtain triggers like razors or knives, or if the therapist should. When possible, clients should be encouraged to do so, but if too much anxiety is elicited, or if a special example like a specific dog or spider is needed, it is better left to the therapist. This is the most important caution in all of exposure work. Clients should never be exposed to situations that are genuinely unsafe. That defeats the entire purpose. You are teaching your amygdala that the trigger is safe. If the trigger is not safe, you are lying to your amygdala and to yourself. Situations, objects, or individuals who genuinely pose a threat should never be part of exposure. You do not expose yourself to an abusive person to get over your fear of them. You do not expose yourself to a dangerous neighborhood to get over your fear of crime. You do not expose yourself to actual harm. Real danger is something that could actually hurt you. A dog that is actively aggressive. A person who has harmed you in the past and may harm you again. A situation where you are genuinely at risk of injury. Perceived danger is something your amygdala has learned to fear but is actually safe. A friendly dog on a leash. A crowded room full of strangers who mean you no harm. An elevator that has been inspected and is perfectly functional. If you are unsure, consult someone you trust. A therapist, a knowledgeable friend, a professional. Do not guess. Do not take risks. The goal is healing, not harm. Chapter 18. The results of exposure training. What exposure achieves. One of the most beneficial results of exposure treatments is that clients increase their ability to tolerate anxiety sensations. Equally significant is that clients learn that they can push through anxiety-eliciting situations with beneficial outcomes. Clients spontaneously begin to disregard the warning of their anxiety, and their avoidance behaviors are greatly reduced. Recognizing ways that one can rewire the amygdala to have less anxiety is a very empowering experience. You have learned to teach your amygdala through experience. You have learned to face your fears and rewire the circuits of anxiety. This is powerful work. This is lasting change. You have learned that you can stay. You have learned that you can feel terrified and not flee. You have learned that the wave always falls, that the feeling always passes, that you have survived every panic attack you have ever had. You have learned that your anxiety is not a command, just a suggestion. And you do not have to obey. You have learned that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Courage is walking into the dining hall when your heart is racing. Courage is raising your hand when your voice might shake. Courage is staying when every instinct screams run. You have learned that freedom is not the absence of anxiety. Freedom is the ability to choose. To choose your actions instead of having them chosen by your fear. To live your life according to your values, not according to your amygdala's outdated alarms. To be the author of your own story. You have done hard things. You have faced what you most wanted to avoid. You have felt what you most wanted to numb. You have stayed where you most wanted to flee. And in doing so, you have taught your amygdala something it will never forget. You have become the teacher. Your amygdala is the student. And the lesson is safety. Chapter 19. The road ahead. What comes next in Part 5? You have traveled through the architecture of fear itself. You have learned that your anxiety is not a mystery, not a character flaw, not a permanent condition. It is the product of a specific structure in your brain, the amygdala, which learned through experience to sound alarms that no longer match the reality of your life. You have learned that the amygdala does not understand language. It cannot be reasoned with, persuaded, or talked out of its fear responses. It understands only one thing, experience. It learns through association, through pairings, through the repeated evidence of what actually happens when triggers appear. You have learned that avoidance, the natural and automatic response to anxiety, is the very thing that preserves fear. Every time you flee a trigger, you teach your amygdala that the trigger was worth fleeing. Every time you escape a sensation, you confirm that the sensation was dangerous. Avoidance feels like relief, but it is a thief. It steals your opportunities to learn. You have learned that exposure is the antidote to avoidance. By facing your triggers intentionally, by staying in their presence until your fear falls, you provide your amygdala with new information. You create new pairings. Trigger plus staying equals safety. Trigger plus survival equals no danger. With enough repetitions, these new pairings become stronger than the old ones. The fear circuit is inhibited. The amygdala learns a new response. You have learned to build hierarchies, to arrange your fears from smallest to largest, to climb them one rung at a time. You have learned to use SUDS ratings to measure your progress, to stay until your fear drops by half, to record your data and watch your own transformation unfold in numbers and graphs. You have learned about safety signals, the hidden crutches that seem to help but actually prevent learning. You have learned why distraction sabotages exposure, why looking away closes the file before it can be edited. You have learned to focus objectively, to describe your experience like a scientist observing a phenomenon rather than a victim drowning in it. You have learned about in vivo exposure, facing real triggers in the real world. About imaginal exposure, facing fears in the safety of your mind. About interoceptive exposure, facing the very sensations your body creates when you are afraid. You have learned to fly solo, to become your own therapist, to troubleshoot problems when the wave refuses to fall. Throughout it all, you have learned the science. You know that new memories form in the lateral nucleus of your amygdala, inhibiting the old fear memories. You know that your ventromedial prefrontal cortex builds a bridge to your amygdala, sending messages of safety based on the evidence you have provided. You know that you are not just coping. You are rewiring. You are changing your brain at the level of neurons and synapses. But the most important thing you have learned is not scientific. It is personal. It is the knowledge, deep in your bones, that you can survive your own anxiety. That the wave always falls. That the feeling always passes. That you have faced your fears and lived to tell the story. That you are capable of more than you ever imagined. You have learned that courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is feeling the fear and doing it anyway. Courage is walking into the dining hall when your heart is racing. Courage is raising your hand when your voice might shake. Courage is staying when every instinct screams run. You have learned that freedom is not the absence of anxiety. Freedom is the ability to choose. To choose your actions instead of having them chosen by your fear. To live your life according to your values, not according to your amygdala's outdated alarms. To be the author of your own story. This is not the end. It is never the end. New triggers will appear. Old fears may resurface. Life will bring challenges you cannot anticipate. But you are not the person who began this journey. You are someone new. Someone who knows the way. Someone who has the tools. Someone who has stared into the fire and not been consumed. When the fear returns, and it will, you know what to do. You will map the trigger. You will build a ladder. You will create the heat. You will ride the wave. You will stay until the fear falls. You will teach your amygdala again and again and again. Not because you are broken, because you are human, and because you are free. Chapter 20. What comes next? Part 5. You have learned to teach your amygdala through experience. You have learned to face your fears and rewire the circuits of anxiety. This is powerful work. This is lasting change. But there is another layer to this journey, another set of skills that can deepen your freedom and transform your relationship with your own mind. Part 5 of this lecture series will focus on mindfulness. Not as a distraction, not as a way to escape your feelings, but as a way to be present with them in an even deeper way. You will learn how to observe your thoughts without being caught in them, how to feel your emotions without being consumed by them, how to rest in awareness itself, the part of you that is always calm, always present, always okay. You will learn that you are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. You are not your anxiety. You are the awareness in which all of these arise and pass away. And when you can rest in that awareness, when you can watch the storm from a place of stillness, even the most intense anxiety loses its power to overwhelm you. Mindfulness will not replace the exposure work you have done. It will enhance it. It will give you new ways to stay present with your triggers, new ways to ride the wave, new ways to teach your amygdala. It will help you catch the catastrophic thoughts earlier, before they spiral. It will help you tolerate the sensations without adding fear to fear. It will help you become even more free. You will learn specific mindfulness practices designed for anxiety. Body scans to ground yourself in the present. Breath awareness to anchor yourself during panic. Thought labeling to create distance from catastrophic cognitions. Loving kindness meditation to cultivate compassion for the parts of yourself that suffer. You will learn the neuroscience of mindfulness, how it strengthens the prefrontal cortex and calms the amygdala, how it builds the very same bridge that exposure builds, but from a different direction. You will learn that mindfulness and exposure are not competing approaches. They are complementary. They are two wings of the same bird. The next series begins now. The journey continues. And you're ready. The wave always falls. You know how to stay until it does. Now you will learn to rest in the stillness that was always there, even in the midst of the storm. The awareness that watches the wave rise and fall, untouched, unafraid, unchanging. That awareness is you. That is who you have always been. And that is who you are becoming. Part 5 awaits. References. Barlow, D. H. and Krask, M. G. 2007. Mastery of Your Anxiety and Panic Workbook, 4th edition. New York, Oxford University Press. Seifert, C. and Becker, C. B. 2007. Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for PTSD, a Case Formulation Approach. New York, Guilford Press. Reflection questions. Getting started. Before reading this book, how did you think about your own anxiety? Did you see it as something wrong with you, something to hide, or just a normal part of college life? Has that changed? Dr. Stella calls the amygdala an overprotective, misinformed, desperately loyal bodyguard. Do you have a person in your life who acts like this? How is it similar or different to how your amygdala operates? What was the most surprising thing you learned from this book? Was there a moment where you thought, wait, that's actually how my brain works? The book says the wave of anxiety always falls. Think of a time when you were really anxious and it eventually passed. What helped you get through it? Your amygdala and you. The amygdala learns through associations, like pairing a bell with a lightning bolt. Can you think of a trigger in your own life that was created this way? Maybe a certain classroom, a song, a person, or a place. Have you ever tried to reason yourself out of anxiety and found it didn't work? Like telling yourself, this is stupid, I shouldn't be scared, while still feeling terrified? Why do you think that doesn't work? The book explains that you have to heat up the water to make tea, meaning you have to feel the anxiety to change it. How does that land with you? Does it make you want to try or want to run? Avoidance versus facing fears. Think about something you've been avoiding lately. A class, a conversation, the dining hall, a text you need to send. What does avoidance feel like in the moment? What does it feel like afterward? The book says avoidance is a thief that steals your opportunities to learn. Has there been a time when avoiding something actually made the fear worse next time? Alex's story about staying in the dining hall shows that facing fears can actually make them smaller. Have you ever stayed in a situation that scared you and realized it wasn't as bad as you thought? The half rule says stay until your anxiety drops by half. Do you usually leave situations when your anxiety peaks, or do you stick around? What might change if you committed to staying longer? Your inner voice. The book talks about catastrophic thinking, like spiraling from, I might fail this test, to, I'll ruin my entire life. Do you notice yourself doing this? What kinds of situations trigger that spiral for you? Catch it, check it, change it is the 3-step process for dealing with scary thoughts. Try it right now with a worry you've had recently. What thought would you catch? What evidence would you check? What would you change it to? Which coping statement hit you hardest? Why? My anxiety may not feel good, but it is not dangerous. If I stay, my anxiety will go down. This is uncomfortable, but I can handle it. I am teaching my amygdala that there is nothing to fear. Do you ever have anxiety that seems to come from nowhere, with no scary thought attached? The book calls this amygdala-based anxiety. How is that different from the anxiety that comes with spiraling thoughts? Your personal triggers. The book lists different kinds of triggers: sounds, objects, smells, body sensations, situations, and memories. Which type shows up most for you? Think about a specific situation that makes you anxious. Can you break it down into smaller pieces? What's the smallest, least scary version? What's the biggest, most terrifying version? Have you ever noticed that physical sensations like a racing heart or feeling dizzy can become triggers themselves? Does this happen to you? If you made a ladder for one of your fears, what would be on the bottom rung? What would be at the top? The things that hold you back. Safety signals are things you use to feel better in scary situations, like having your phone, texting a friend, or gripping something tightly. What are your safety signals? The book says safety signals can prevent real learning because your amygdala learns the situation is only safe with the signal. How would it feel to try facing something without your usual safety signal? Distraction feels like it helps in the moment, but actually hurts exposure work. When you're in a scary situation, do you tend to distract yourself? What would it mean to just stay present with the fear instead? The difference between objective focus and subjective focus is huge. Objective focus is describing what's happening like a scientist. Subjective focus is being totally caught up in the fear. Which one do you usually do? Can you try objective focus right now with whatever you're feeling? Your body and anxiety. Interoceptive exposure means purposely creating the body sensations you fear, like making your heart race or making yourself dizzy. What's your gut reaction to this idea? Terrifying? Interesting? Both? If you were going to try an interoceptive exercise, which sensation would you pick first? Racing heart? Shortness of breath? Dizziness? The goal is to teach your amygdala that these sensations are uncomfortable but not dangerous. Do you believe that's possible? What would it feel like to not be afraid of your own body's signals? Doing the work. The book suggests starting with exposures that rate 50 or 60 on the SUD scale, not your biggest fear. Why do you think starting small matters? What's one small fear you could realistically face this week? Not your biggest one, just something manageable that would still create some anxiety. Who could support you in this? A friend, a therapist, a family member? What would you want them to do or not do? The half rule says stay until your fear drops by half. If your peak anxiety was 80, you'd stay until 40. How does having a clear number change how you think about getting through hard moments? The science part. Learning that your brain actually changes physically when you do exposures, forming new memories that override the old ones, is pretty wild. Does knowing this make you more willing to try? The GPS analogy where the system eventually recalibrates to a new route is helpful for some people. Have you ever experienced a fear getting smaller over time? What did that feel like? The book says you're not just learning to cope, you're rewiring your brain. How does that thought land with you? Empowering? Overwhelming? Real-life application. What's one specific thing you'd like to be able to do without anxiety taking over? Go to the dining hall? Speak in class? Make friends? Go to parties? What would be your very first tiny step toward that goal? What's the worst that could realistically happen if you tried? What's the best that could happen? What's more likely to actually happen? Troubleshooting. The book talks about what to do when anxiety doesn't go down during an exposure. Have you ever felt stuck like this? What do you think was happening? Flashbacks can happen during exposure, especially with memories. Do you have a way to ground yourself in the present if you get pulled into the past? Naming things you see, feeling your feet on the floor. If you try an exposure and it goes badly, the book says that's not failure, it's data. How can you treat your attempts as experiments instead of tests you pass or fail? Friends and support. Do your friends know about your anxiety? If yes, how have they supported you? If no, why not? How can you support a friend who's also dealing with anxiety without trying to fix them or reassure them too much? The book mentions that therapists sometimes avoid exposure because it's hard to watch someone suffer. Have you ever had someone try to protect you from your feelings when what you really needed was someone to stay with you while you felt them? What would you want a friend to say or do if you were in the middle of an exposure and wanted to quit? Looking ahead. What's one thing you want to remember from this book a month from now? A year from now? Part 5 is about mindfulness. What do you hope to learn from that? Have you ever tried meditation or mindfulness before? The book ends with "The wave always falls." What does that sentence mean to you now compared to when you started reading? If you could tell your anxiety one thing, what would it be? Bonus. Journal prompts. If you want to go deeper, try writing about these. Describe a recent anxious moment using only objective focus. What did you see, hear, feel? What thoughts passed through? What was your SUDS number? Write a letter to your amygdala. Thank it for trying to protect you, then explain what you've learned and what you need it to learn now. Draw or describe your exposure ladder for one specific fear. What's on each rung? How will you know when you're ready to climb to the next one? Write about a time you avoided something and how it felt. Then write about a time you faced something and how that felt different. Group discussion tips. If you're reading this with friends or a campus group, no one has to share anything they're not ready to share. Just listening is okay. What's said in the group stays in the group. You're not here to fix each other. You're here to understand each other. It's okay to laugh. Anxiety is serious, but sometimes the things it makes us do are kind of funny. If someone gets really upset, check in with them after. Have crisis resources handy just in case. The wave always falls, and it's easier to ride when you're not riding alone. About the author. Dr. Sheila Hodge Windover lifelong calling to empower others has forged a distinguished career built upon